welcome to episode 8 of this GS750 Restoration project. In this episode we're actually going to start pulling the thing apart, stripping it right down to a bare frame so we can send that off to get sandblasted and powder coated, and then slowly start putting it back together. So yeah, let's start pulling all the pieces off and then work out the easiest way to get the engine out of the frame without killing somebody. So yeah, our next section of this video will be some time-lapse photos of just removing all the pieces. So now that we have the bike basically down to just the frame, wheels and the engine, the next step is to remove the engine, which I think the easiest way to do that will be to lay the whole thing down on its side, unbolt the engine from the frame and then stand the frame up, leaving the engine behind, and then put that onto a trolley, and then I need to make up some brackets to mount it onto my engine stand, which will make it much easier to work on, and then, you know, completely pull the frame apart and send that plus all the other black parts off to be sandblasted and powder coated. While that's away, I can then work on the engine. As I said in the previous video, I need to change the rings, so I'll pull the head off again and give the cylinders a hone, and I've got some new rings and a new head gasket, and hopefully that will fix up the low compression problem. So yeah, next step is to try and get the engine out without giving myself a hernia. Well, after about an hour of levering and manoeuvring and sticking pieces of wood underneath and jacking the frame up and jacking the motor up and taking off the little breather cap on the top of the motor there, finally managed to get this out. So put all this back into the garage, and then I think it's beer o'clock. So it's now apart. I've got the engine here on this little trolley. That will eventually be going on this engine stand here. So I have to make up some brackets to hold it onto this bracket here. Got the front end there, which I ended up having to take off so that I could manoeuvre the frame a bit easier while I was trying to get it off the engine. And then here's the main frame with the back wheel still attached. So that was good progress. Quite tricky. As I say, I'd heard of people doing it before. I thought you had to take off this little breather cap, but I thought I'd give it a try without it. But yeah, it's just a matter of millimeters. So once that was off, a bit of jiggling around, eventually it just popped off. Getting it back in could be even more interesting. So now that I have the engine out, I've made up these brackets here to bolt to the side of the engine using the two rear engine mounts, and these bolts here theoretically will match up to this engine stand. So the plan is to winch the engine up to the right height using a ratchet winch and bolt it onto here, which will then make the engine much easier to move around and work on. So here is the setup. Have the engine strapped up with ratchet straps, and then up to this ratchet winch hanging off a beam in my carport. So the plan is to pull it up to the right height and then simply bolt that to this plate here, and then hopefully the engine will hang in midair on the engine stand. So amazingly, that seems to have worked. It was a bit frightening with the engine hanging in midair a couple of feet above the ground, but it's all bolted up now, so I'll take the pressure off from the ratchet winch, and hopefully the engine just stays there without collapsing and ripping off the back of the motor. Okay, there we have it, viewers. All good, nothing's collapsed yet, and fairly easy to move around, so this is going to make things a lot easier to work on the top end when I get to replacing the rings and ripping that head back off. So success. So that's it for episode 8 of this GS750 restoration, and the last one for 2019. Apologies for some of those portrait videos that I took. I was probably a little bit under stress with my engine hanging about 1 metre off the ground. That all worked out well. Bit of a rookie mistake. This one's relatively short, but I guess it's probably a good place to finish, with the engine out and the frame mostly taken apart. It's holidays here, and give me a bit of time to spend some time on this project, so hopefully we can get the frame pulled apart completely, ready for sending off, and change these rings and do a hone and get the engine, maybe start polishing it up for reinstallation. I did buy myself some Christmas gifts, so some tools, including a proper sandblasting cabinet, so that'll make things a bit easier for sandblasting the smaller pieces. I've spoken to my sandblaster and powder coater who did my katana a few years ago, and he's luckily still doing the same business, so he did a good job last time, so I'll send it off to him this time. And yeah, so Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays to all of you. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in 2020 for the next video in this series.